Montana Territory, September 1883. The wind carried a bite that night, sharp as broken glass. When Zeke Barnett first laid eyes on her standing alone on the edge of her porch with a rifle in her arms and a storm in her eyes. "Evenin'," he said, one boot on the first step, hat in his hand. "I heard you might be looking for help before winter sets in." She did not lower the rifle. "You heard wrong," she said. Zeke did not move. He was tall, lean, with a dust-worn coat and a week's worth of trail strapped to his back. His horse, tied at the gate, snorted and pawed the earth like it wanted out of the cold, too. "I can chop wood, mend fence, fix tack," he went on, voice calm. "I do not ask much, just a place to sleep and a warm meal now and then." Her jaw moved like she was grinding her teeth. Then she looked past him, out toward the dark fields. "You got a name?" she asked. "Zeke Barnett." She lowered the rifle, but only just. "Cora Ashby. You can sleep in the barn, you eat what you earn." He gave a nod, lips twitching just a little with relief. "Thank you, ma'am." She turned without another word and went back inside her small house, closing the door firm behind her. He could still hear the lock sliding into place. They said Cora Ashby had no use for men, and Zeke believed it now. But he also saw the way her shoulders sagged once she thought no one was looking. Like someone who had carried too much for too long. The next morning he was up before the sun. He fed her 2 milk goats, checked the chicken wire, and started in on the firewood. By the time she came out, coat buttoned tight and hair braided down her back, he had split a full cord. She stopped on the porch watching him. "You always work that fast?" she asked. "Only when cold's coming," he said. She gave a short nod and walked off toward the shed with a bucket and a silent dog trailing behind her. The dog, some mutt with a bad limp, and one good eye stared at Zeke like it was waiting for him to do something wrong. It went like that for 4 days. Work, silence, cold nights. She never invited him into the house, and he never asked. But every night, after the sun dropped behind the hills and the sky turned to ink, she would sit on the porch with her coat tight and her rifle across her lap. Zeke, lying in the hayloft, would listen. Not to her she never spoke, but to the wind. The strange, restless wind that moved through the pines and across the fields like it was searching for something. On the 5th night, he stepped out of the barn and walked toward the porch. She looked up. "You lost." "No, ma'am," he said. "But I figure I have the right to sit if I earned it." She hesitated. Then she nodded toward the other rocking chair. "Suit yourself." He sat. The wind picked up, brushing the trees like a whisper. "You always listen like that?" she asked after a long while. "Only when it sounds like it has something to say." She looked at him sideways, then turned back to the dark. "What do you think it says tonight?" "Sounds lonely," he said. She did not answer, but she did not go inside either. The next morning, she was chopping kindling when she winced and dropped the axe. Zeke was across the yard in 2 long strides. "You all right?" She shook her head, breath sharp. "Ribs," she said. "Split one last week trying to haul the damn feed barrel." "It has not healed." "Let me," he said, picking up the axe before she could argue. "You sit." She bristled, but pain won out. She stepped back, arms crossed. "You always run to fix things?" she asked. "When I can. Some things are not meant to be carried alone." She looked away, jaw tight. "I carried 2 children alone till the day their father walked out and left them crying in the mud. So do not talk to me about what should or should not be carried." Zeke paused. "You got children now?" She nodded toward the house. "Inside, sleeping." Zeke said nothing, just kept chopping. She watched him for a long moment before walking back inside. Later that day, he met them 2 small figures tucked under blankets in the corner of the main room. The girl, maybe 7, was named Hallie. Her little brother, barely 4, was called Henry. Both had their mother's eyes and the kind of quiet that comes from being let down too many times. They warmed to Zeke faster than she did. Hallie asked him if he could build her a toy horse. Henry just followed him around the yard like a shadow. Cora said nothing, but Zeke noticed she started leaving biscuits out in the mornings. By the 2nd week, he had fixed the front gate, patched the roof, and built a sled for the children using old scrap wood. He never asked about their father again. One evening, as the sky turned orange and gold over the western hills, he found her sitting alone beside the goat pen. She had her knees pulled up, arms wrapped around them. "Something wrong?" he asked. She looked up, startled, then sighed. No, just tired. He sat beside her, close enough to share warmth but far enough to give her space. I was not always like this, she said after a pause. I used to laugh, I used to dream, but then he left and everything fell on me. The land, the animals, the children. No one came. No one stayed. I stayed. She looked at him, eyes sharp. You say that now? I say that because it is true. The wind picked up again, moving through the trees just like before. They sat in silence, listening. After a while, she said, You really hear it? I do. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes. That night, he did not go back to the barn. He stayed on the porch beside her, both of them wrapped in quiet, watching the stars, and when the wind came again, it did not sound lonely anymore. The frost came early that year, settling into the soil like a quiet warning. Each morning brought a thinner sun, and Zeke started rising before dawn to bank the stove fire before the children stirred. Cora let him into the house now, no words about it, just moved the bedding from the barn to the bench beside the hearth one evening, then walked away without explaining. He hadn't asked for more than that, and she hadn't offered. One late afternoon, Hallie dragged a wool blanket from the house and laid it on the dry grass near the fence line. She sat cross-legged, eyes sharp as flint, watching Zeke hammer a loose hinge back onto the shed door. You ever been shot? She asked. Zeke looked up, then glanced toward the house. Cora was inside, kneading dough with Henry standing on a stool beside her, flour dusting his fingers. Once, he said, setting down the hammer. Wasn't bad, just a graze on the shoulder. She nodded like that made sense. Mama says folks get mean when they're scared. Were you scared when you got shot? He wiped his palms on his trousers and sat down across from her. I was scared before it happened. Afterward, I was just mad. She fiddled with a dry stalk of grass. Mama don't get mad, she goes quiet instead. Quiet can carry a lot, Zeke said. Hallie studied him a while, then folded the blanket over her legs. You gonna stay through snow? If your mama lets me. She don't let easy. I noticed. That night, after the children had gone to sleep, Cora stood by the window, arms folded, watching the wind pull at the bare branches outside. I didn't know she still remembered that night, she said, quiet enough that he almost thought she was speaking to herself. Zeke waited. They came through just after harvest. 3 men from up near the Judith River said they were passing through. I was green enough to let them camp near the back field. One tried to take Hallie with him the second night. He didn't get far. She rubbed her hand along her forearm, slow, but Hallie saw. She doesn't talk about it. Zeke stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. You were alone, she nodded once. Had the shotgun and the dog, that was enough. She turned then, met his eyes fully. I don't need saving. I didn't come to save. She studied him for a breath. Then why are you here? He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a folded scrap of paper. My brother died last spring. He had a claim out near Bozeman. I was headed there to settle what's left. But I stopped in Red Butte to trade for a new saddle cinch, and someone at the post office mentioned a widow out this way with too much land and not enough help. Cora frowned. You changed course on a rumor. I was tired of riding. He held her gaze. And I was tired of not belonging anywhere. She didn't answer. But her shoulders eased just a little. The next morning, she handed him a small tin and a folded paper sack. You'll take the wagon to town. We need flour, lamp oil, and salt. That tin's coin from the egg money. He took it without question. Anything else? Pick up a new pair of socks for Henry if you find any thick enough. He won't ask, but the ones he's got won't last another freeze. Zeke spent most of that day in the saddle, the wagon groaning beneath sacks and barrels by late afternoon. He stopped once halfway back to let the mules water at a narrow creek, then reached into his coat and pulled out a small wrapped bundle he'd tucked there earlier. It was dark by the time he returned. The house glowed faint with lamplight, the smell of stew drifting from the open door. He carried the parcels inside and set them down gently on the table. Cora looked up from the hearth. Did you find socks? Got 2 pair. Figured he'd wear through one quick. She nodded, then narrowed her eyes slightly as he placed the wrapped bundle beside her. What's this? He shrugged. Something Hallie might like, saw it in the mercantile window. She unwrapped the paper slowly, revealing a small iron horse figurine, not fine but sturdy. The kind a child could carry in her pocket without breaking. Cora didn't touch it right away. She just looked at it, then at him. "You didn't have to, I know." She turned back to the stew, but her voice softened. "You think about staying past winter?" He leaned on the table, watching her stir. "I think about a lot of things lately." She didn't reply, but when she handed him a bowl, her hand lingered a moment against his. Not long, not bold, but enough. After the children were asleep, they stepped outside again, the porch creaking beneath them. The wind had changed, softer now, still cold but not as aimless. Zeke leaned back in the rocker, hat resting on his knee. "You ever wonder what it's saying now?" Cora wrapped the shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I think it's listening tonight." He looked over at her. The shadows caught the edge of her face, the quiet strength tucked deep in her features. "Then maybe it's waiting." She nodded, the barest motion. But beside him, her hand moved across the armrest, and her fingers, for the first time, found his. Snow came quiet one morning, drifting over the fields like a whispered promise. The sky hung low and colorless, and smoke curled slow from the chimney. Zeke stepped out first, crunching through the fresh layer to check the coop. The hens clucked low, pressed together for warmth. He scattered feed with gloved hands, then turned when he heard the door creak open behind him. Cora stood there, Henry bundled on her hip, Hallie wrapped in a quilt beside her. She didn't speak, just watched the sky like she was measuring how long the storm might last. Zeke walked back up, boots leaving clean tracks. "It's light for now." Might not hold past sundown. Cora shifted Henry's weight higher. "We've got enough in the cellar to last if it turns." She looked down at Hallie. "Go help your brother wash up." When they were gone, she stepped off the porch and pulled her shawl tighter. "The cow hasn't let down milk since before the frost. I think she's holding from the cold." "I'll see if she'll take to a warm cloth," Zeke said. "Sometimes that helps." She nodded, then paused. "Your brother, you said he had a claim near Bozeman. You planning to keep it?" "Already signed it over to a neighbor," he said, brushing snow from his sleeve. "Man with a family and no land of his own, didn't feel right to hold it when I had no use for it." Cora studied him. "He your older brother, by 3 years, rode together a long while. He was steadier than me. I was always the one chasing something off the map." Her brow furrowed. "So what stopped the chasing?" Zeke glanced toward the barn, then back at her. "I think I finally rode far enough to know what was worth staying for." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her hand rested against the porch post, fingers curling slightly. Later, as the wind thickened and the snow turned wet and heavy, Zeke found Henry sitting cross-legged beneath the table, humming to himself while carving a piece of soft pine with a blunt butter knife. Cora was stitching in the rocker, her mending basket beside her. Hallie leaned over a slate, tongue caught between her teeth as she copied out letters. Zeke crouched low. "What have you got there, Henry?" The boy held up the pine. "It's a bear." Zeke tilted his head. "Looks like one, sure enough." "But he's missing a paw." Henry frowned. "He got in a fight." Zeke didn't say anything, just reached out and gently turned the piece in the boy's hand. "Still standing, though." Henry nodded, solemn. "He don't give up." That night the wind thrashed the shutters so hard that Hallie woke crying. Cora rose and wrapped her in a quilt. But the girl only quieted when Zeke lit the lantern and sat at the foot of her bed, talking low about a time he got caught in a spring hailstorm outside Miles City and had to sleep under the belly of a mule. Cora stood in the doorway, arms folded, listening. When the wind eased and Hallie drifted off, Zeke rose and met Cora's gaze. She didn't speak straight off, just turned and led him back into the kitchen, where the fire had gone to coals. She knelt and stirred the embers, then looked up at him. "I used to think the wind was trying to take things from me." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "And now, I think maybe it's been carrying something all this time. I just didn't know how to listen." He moved closer, careful. "You hear it now?" She nodded once. "It doesn't sound like loss anymore." He reached, slow, and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. She didn't flinch. "I'm not going anywhere, Cora." "I know." She stepped closer, the edge of her shawl brushing his coat. "I never wanted to need someone again, but you're not someone, you're you." Zeke smiled, tired and steady. "I can live with that." She leaned into him then, her forehead resting just below his collarbone, and he wrapped his arms around her, tentative at first, then sure. Outside, the wind moved softer through the trees, like it had found something it had been looking for. By the third week of snowfall, the barn roof groaned under the weight of it. Zeke climbed up with a shovel at first light, careful with each step, knocking drifts loose before the next storm found them. Below, Cora shoveled a path to the well with her scarf wound tight and her breath catching white in the morning air. "You always clear it yourself?" he asked when she came near. She tugged her mittens off, cheeks flushed from cold. "Every year since I've been here," he nodded, eyes on the well crank. "The boards on the bucket rail are soft. I'll plane a new set once it warms." Cora didn't answer, but her mouth pulled tight like she was thinking hard on something. She turned toward the house instead, and Zeke followed. Inside, the warmth hit like a wave. Hallie sat near the stove arranging stones along the edge of a pie tin. Henry dozed in a quilt roll, one thumb wedged under his chin. Cora set the kettle on, then glanced at Zeke. "My brother sent a letter. Says he'll pass through come spring." Zeke leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "You close?" Her eyes settled on the kettle. "He left when I was 16. Took a pair of boots and my mother's horse. I haven't ridden him since the war ended." Zeke didn't press her. The quiet stretched, not uncomfortable, just full. "I don't know what he wants," she said finally. "You don't have to figure it now," he said. "Spring's a long ways yet." That evening, while the children slept and the wind moved soft through the pines, Cora opened the lid of a cedar box near the hearth. She pulled out a worn journal with a cracked spine and pages full of slanting script. "I used to write everything down," she said, settling beside Zeke, "before I had to put my hands to more useful things." He took the book when she offered it, careful not to crease the pages. Her words were small and neat, the ink faded in places. He read one passage, dated 5 years back, about a broken fence and a hawk that circled for days. "You see everything," he said. "I used to think if I wrote it down, I'd remember who I was, not just what I did to get through the day." Zeke closed the book and handed it back. "You still know?" "I'm not sure I do." "You sit up nights listening to the wind," he said, voice low. "That tells me more than any page." She set the journal aside. "You ever marry?" "No," he said. "There was a girl in Abilene once, but she wanted roots and I didn't know how to stop running." Cora reached for the kettle and poured them each a cup, the tin mugs warm in their hands. "I don't know how to be with someone," she said. "Not truly. I only know how to keep people from leaving." Zeke sipped slow. "Then you already know the hardest part." She looked at him, long and quiet. "Every time I let someone near, something takes them." "I've got nowhere else to be," he said. "And nothing left worth running to." She set her mug down and leaned her head against his shoulder. Nothing more, no words, just that. Outside, the wind whispered against the shutters. Not lonely, not waiting, just home. The thaw came slow, spilling down from the high ridge in thin streams that traced the slope like veins. By early March, the snow had pulled back from the south-facing hills, leaving behind a thick crust of mud and the first stubborn shoots of new grass. The roof no longer creaked at night, and the stove didn't need feeding quite so often. Zeke stood in the yard, sleeves rolled to the elbow as he sanded a length of pine smooth. Hallie knelt beside him, sorting through nails with the solemn focus of a child trusted with something real. From the barn came the soft bleat of one of the goats dropping her kid. Cora's shape disappeared inside, apron tied high, hands steady in the work she'd done for years. "I'm gonna name this one June," Cora said later, washing her arms in the cold basin beside the porch. "She's early, but she's strong." Zeke poured her a dipper from the bucket. "You always name the spring ones, only the ones I think'll last." She dried her hands, glancing toward the shed. "There's a patch of land near the tree line I haven't touched in 2 years, too tangled for a plow. Wouldn't mind seeing it turned." "I'll clear it," he said. "Might take a week, maybe less." "You sure?" She leaned against the porch rail, voice low. "It's mean work, all roots and clay. I've done meaner." He looked over at her, eyes steady. "And that land's not the only thing that deserves a second start." That night, after the children had gone to sleep, Cora brought out a sewing tin and laid it open on the table. Inside, nestled beside her shears and thimble, was a small square of blue calico. "I saved this for Hallie's dress," she said, running her thumb over the faded fabric. "But she's outgrown the pattern, thought I might line a cradle quilt with it instead." Zeke leaned back in the chair. Planning ahead, she didn't meet his eyes. "I'm just saying. If you meant what you said in the barn that night about not going anywhere, I'd like to believe it." "I did mean it," he said, "but I wasn't going to press you." "You didn't have to," she said. "I've been listening." She reached across the table and took his hand. It was the first time she'd done it without hesitation. Her fingers were calloused and warm, and they closed around his like she'd already made the decision. "I don't want to do this part alone," she said. "Not anymore." He turned her hand over and pressed his lips to her palm, quiet and sure. "I'm yours, Cora." She didn't cry, but her throat worked like she might have once. They married the following Sunday. No preacher came riding out, so Cora wrote a letter to the circuit minister in White Sulphur Springs, and when he couldn't come till mid-April, they stood together anyway, side by side in the parlor, with Hallie holding a sprig of pine and Henry clutching Zeke's belt loop. "I reckon the Lord already knows," she said, fingers laced with his. "We'll make it formal when he can spare the time." Zeke kissed her then, slow and sure, with the fire popping behind them and the wind outside tugging at the shutters like it wanted to be let in. Spring brought more than green shoots. Cora's brother arrived in mid-May, riding a gelding with a patchy flank and a saddle that had seen better decades. He looked older than his years, the kind of older that came from regret, not time. She met him at the gate, arms crossed. "You came for something," he dismounted slow, eyes on the ground. "I came to say I was wrong and to ask if you'd let me help a while." Cora didn't answer right away, then she stepped aside and nodded toward the shed. "There's fence to mend." He worked alongside Zeke that week, quiet most days, but steady. The children watched him like he was a stranger, which he was, but less so by the second morning. He left 2 weeks later, promising to send a parcel of tools from Butt. "He meant it," Zeke said that night, resting beside her beneath the open windows. "I think he's trying." "I don't need him to be perfect," she said, head on his chest, "just better than he was." By autumn, the new field had been turned. Hallie spent her afternoons stringing horsehair beads with the neighbor girl from across the ridge, and Henry had taken to following Zeke into the barn with a small hammer looped through his belt. Cora stood one evening by the gate, hand on her growing belly, watching the sunset spill gold across the hills. "It's funny," she said, "how the land never changes fast, but people can." Zeke stepped beside her, arm around her waist. "You didn't change," he said. "You just stopped carrying it alone." She leaned into him, eyes soft. "You gave me space to remember who I was and room to become something more." He kissed her temple, then her cheek, then the corner of her mouth. They stood there until the stars came out, the wind brushing past them like a promise kept. Inside, the stove burned low. The children slept. The door was latched, and for the first time in years, Cora Ashby's house was full of peace. They never left the homestead. Never needed to. They raised 4 children, grew beans and barley, and taught their sons to listen to their mother and their daughters to speak with their whole hearts. Zeke built a second room with his own hands, and Cora painted the shutters blue. No one came to take anything from them again. And the wind, when it moved over the hills, carried only the sound of laughter and the quiet hush of a love that had taken root, deep and unshakable.